Well, I think we'll get started with our webinar today. Good afternoon. My name is Bill Webb, and I'm the Executive Director of the Congressional Fire Services Institute. We welcome you to our monthly webinar series, and today we're going to be talking about the AFG Safer Grant Programs. We are pleased to have Cathie Patterson, Branch Chief for the AFG Grant Program, as our speaker. Cathie's office has a staff of 28 and is a part of the Grants Directorate for the Federal Emergency Management Agency. As Grant Program Director, Cathie oversees the administration of 3 Federal Fire Service grant programs: the Assistance to Firefighters Grant Program, the Staffing for Adequate Fire and Emergency Response Grant Program, and the Fire Prevention and Safety Grant Program. As many of you know, AFG program came about in 2001, and it awards grants to help firefighters and first responders obtain critically needed equipment, protective gear, emergency vehicles, training, and other resources to help protect the communities in which they provide their services. Congress created the Staffing for Adequate Fire and Emergency Services Response Program, otherwise known as the SAFER program, in 2006 to provide funding directly to fire departments and volunteer fire service organizations to help them increase or maintain the number of trained firefighting personnel in their communities. And then the third program, the Fire Prevention and Safety Grant Programs, provides funding to eligible recipients for fire prevention programs and supporting firefighter health and safety research and development. Since 2001, approximately $12 billion in AFG SAFER funding has been awarded to fire departments and public safety agencies across the nation with these 3 programs. Each year, Congress does appropriate the funding for the programs. So it is up to us to keep in contact with our federal representatives to ensure to encourage them to continue supporting these programs to the fullest extent possible. CFSI can provide information to you about the status of the annual appropriations process to help you deliver your message to members of Congress. As you can see, I put an email address up there for our Director of Government Affairs, Michaela Campbell. And so if you ever have any questions, please contact her, and she can provide information on how we're doing our work up on Capitol Hill to maintain support for these programs. You can also contact the International Association of Fire Chiefs, the International Association of Firefighters, and the National Volunteer Fire Council to find out what they are doing to help us in this collective effort to, again, ensure that these programs are maintained at the level that they need to be and perhaps increase funding further on down the road. Before we get started, we have allotted 1 hour for this session. If you have any questions, please type them, and we'll try to answer as many as possible during the allotted time. If you have a question specifically regarding a grant application, the web pages for each of these grant programs does have contact information for their help desk. So it'd be best if you contacted the help desk to ask for specific questions related to your grant application. And as you can see on the screen here, I've also included information for the help desk including the phone numbers as well as the email address. So without further ado, let's get started. Let's talk about AFG SAFER, and it's always my pleasure to have this opportunity to talk to Cathie. We go back a long way, participating in a lot of meetings and having a lot of discussions on these programs, and you've done outstanding work again to ensure that they run as smoothly and as efficiently as possible. You do your work, and we certainly want the fire service to do its work to make sure that, again, Congress realizes the value of this program. It's been a great partnership for all of us, and again, just on behalf of CFSI, Cathie, I thank you for all the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Bill. It's great to be here in the new virtual world. But thanks for organizing this. It's a great time to have this conversation. We are in the middle of the fiscal year application cycle. So we wanted to make sure that we shared all the information that we can for what's coming up, what's going on, and how applicants can be successful in submitting some applications. So perfect timing. Thanks for organizing it.
So how does one administer a $700 million in annual grants virtually? I know you've got your staff scattered all over the place, working from their homes. How's that been going for you?
It's definitely been a challenge. I mean, part of the first thing that hit us was that we had not conducted a peer review process for the application cycle. So we had to learn very quickly how to turn that into an in-person review to a virtual one. The staff challenges of, we're essentially in 3 different states. So learning Zoom, we all became very familiar with MS Teams. It's, commonplace now. But it is definitely been a challenge ensuring that we can continue to provide support, continue to do what we need to do to get the grant funding out the door as quickly as possible.
Okay. We're up again. We've got some time, deadlines, but we've got some ongoing efforts with AFG and with SAFER. The application processes are underway, or they're about to be underway. So can you give us an update on the application?
So the timeline right now is that the AFG program, which is the equipment, training, vehicles, that application period is currently open, and it will close on February 12th. The next one to open is fire prevention and safety. The notice of funding availability is available for the FP&S one. It will open next Monday, the 25th, and it closes on February 26th. And then just hot off the press, we do have the SAFER program that is going to announce, and the Nofos is going to post within the next couple of days. And that application period will open on February 8th, and it will close on March 12th. So there's a slight overlap with running the programs. We felt that that was going to be necessary in order for us to move this funding quickly. But again, the programs are going to be available. The Nofos are a great place to start looking at those and preparing ahead of time before the application period's open.
So, you know, we've gotten some questions sent in from some folks already, and a lot of these questions can be answered once you start looking at the Nofo. So can you just briefly explain what the Nofo is and the type of information that's contained in them?
Yeah, the Nofo is, we use the term Nofo, but it's technically the Notice of Funding Opportunity. And essentially what that does is provides the list of what the priorities are for the program, what the rules of the road are, right? So for those who are applicants who've applied several times, the Appendix A is where it really starts on what's new in the Nofo for each year. So you can flip right to Appendix A and start to get a feel for what's changed between the programs. If you're new to grants, if you're new to any of the fire grants, you should really start at the beginning and ensure that you know what the requirements are, what the rules are, what you need to be prepared for, not only in preparing an application, but managing the grant. But that's the best place to start with any grant opportunity, is to look at the Nofo, familiarize yourself with what's going on with the program that year, who's eligible, and what the funding levels will be.
You just mentioned anything new for the programs? Is there anything new in that?
Yeah. Well, the biggest change for AFG is that we expanded the period of performance. So historically, dating all the way back to 2001, any grant recipient under AFG had 1 year to perform the activities. What we've found is that, especially in these trying times, it's a little bit difficult for the recipients to perform in one year and get all the equipment in that they need to order and procure the right things, and any delivery challenges. So we are expanding the period of performance for the fiscal year 21s to a 2-year period of performance. So that's the big change. Most of the other changes for AFG are minor. The things that were changed in the Nofo are basic clarifications of questions that came up from previous years. There isn't a significant change for FP&S either. We added last year some additional language about the commitment to mitigation. So if a fire department's applying, you know, we want to have a better understanding of what their underlying commitment is to mitigation. Are they adopting fire codes? What are they doing? You know, training, prevention programs. So that is going to expand it into its own narrative section for the FP&S program. For SAFER, the biggest news that we have is that we were able to have some of the restrictions waived. So there isn't going to be a cost share for SAFER for FY20. There isn't going to be a requirement for cost caps on salaries, which was in previous years. There isn't going to be a supplanting requirement. And more importantly, we are going back to the years by which we will be funding positions that are facing layoffs in the FY20 year. So that's a big change for SAFER for this year. And again, SAFER will be opening on February 8th. So the Nofo should be posting in the next couple of days. There are some additional information in there as well on what those requirements are.
And where can you find the Nofos?
The Nofo is available on the website. I do have something that a virtual handout that we can post into the Q&A later, which is a reminder that has the dates on it of the application periods and some link to some FEMA resources to include a link to the Nofos, where to find information, other people that can help support the application process itself.
Okay. FEMA Go registration process. I know that you changed. Well, you didn't.
No.
Yeah.
I may be powerful. I'm not that powerful.
Yeah. As part of streamlining and efficiency. But I know there's been some bumps in the road with that process. At least some folks have expressed that to me. But can you talk just a little bit about that process? And
yeah. So as luck would have it, FEMA has decided that they were moving to a one system for all grants, right? So this is not just the change to move to the FEMA Go system was not specific to AFG and the fire grants. It was a FEMA-wide initiative. Where we got lucky, I guess, is that we were picked as the spearhead program for all FEMA grants to move into this new system. So we got to, have a little bit of growing pains in the transition over to the new system. But we feel like this is going to be the stabilized system moving forward for all of FEMA. So the FEMA Go system does have some additional internal controls that allows FEMA to be compliant with some regulations, reporting regulations on who gets funding and how that's allocated. So part of that process is that we are tying the user registration link to sam.gov, which is, sam.gov has been around for a long time, but in terms of registration, any federal funding recipient must have a registration in sam.gov. So the FEMA Go system is tying into that and connecting those dots. What we have found is that some folks who are unfamiliar with preparing grants or are new to the process are waiting to the application period to initiate that. And actually, we have some folks that are waiting to the last week of the application period to initiate that registration process. And what I would strongly encourage folks to do is register now. If you think you're going to apply for SAFER and you have not previously applied, now is a great time to do it. Same with AFG. Don't wait to the last minute. But once your registration is complete, you can move forward. The important part I would also suggest here is that whoever you select to be an authorized representative of your organization should be somebody that you are turning over the keys to your house to, right? So be very mindful of who you give those permissions to. They're going to have access to your bank account information. They're going to have access to certifying on your fire department's behalf. So there are different roles in the registration process that people can have. And if you're unfamiliar with what those roles are, how to do the registration process, you can attend one of our webinars that walks through that. And we do have resources on the website, some user guides to walk through that registration process. But again, I wouldn't wait. Pick the right POCs to represent your organization and get registered as soon as possible if you intend to apply.
Okay. Grants management, grant writers. I know some departments actually go out and hire grant writers to complete their applications. Some folks don't feel capable or don't have the time or for various reasons go about doing it that way. Your thoughts, your comments on grant writers and the good things, the bad things, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I mean, you said it, Bill. There's good big grant writers and there's bad grant writers, right? So my message to anybody who wants to use a grant writer is that there certainly are some good grant writers out there. Do you need a grant writer? Maybe, if you're not comfortable with writing that justification and you need that additional support. I would also remind folks that this is a peer-reviewed application. So the reviewers are your fellow fire service representatives. So it doesn't have to be written in a form that, you're going to be writing to the federal government to request these funds. What I would also caution you is, if you're going to use a grant writer, ensure that your application being submitted on your department's behalf accurately reflects the data from your department, accurately reflects the information that you feel is honest and accurate. And I say this as a cautionary tale. You must ensure that what's being submitted is unique to your department. And unfortunately, we want to ensure that it's not a copy and paste narrative. And the reason that's important is that when you have somebody that you're entrusting to write an application for you, you don't want them to take somebody else's information and then try and make it fit for your department. If it's not your story, it's not your story. So if you use a grant writer, ask them to ensure that your narrative is unique, that your story is unique. Ask them to ensure that the information that they're putting in that is not made up or enhanced for competitive purposes. But take your due diligence to review any application that's prepared from an outside source. And if it doesn't resonate with you that this is truthful information and not misleading to the reviewer, then don't submit it. It has repercussions. So your department is on the line for any information that's submitted in that application. If it's inaccurate, if it gets reported, it could go all the way up to the Office of Inspector General. And it's not against the grant writer at that point, it's against the submitter. And that submitter would be somebody from the fire department. So my cautionary tale is just, use them but protect them and protect your department and your resources from what's being submitted in these applications.
Very good information. And correct me if I'm wrong, but if you do use a grant writer and you are awarded a grant, that is a reimbursable expense, is it not? The use of
yes, up to $1,500. Yeah.
Okay. Just to briefly talk about the process. The grant is submitted to your office. I know that there's a score, there's a peer review process, but just kind of quickly go over that, because you just did mention that fellow firefighters are the ones that are really looking at these grants. And so if you could just briefly explain how that whole process goes about until you finally get either the rejection or the acceptance.
Yeah, so this process really starts with, I think you had mentioned earlier about appropriations. It really started with the authorizing legislation. And I think one of the things that's important is to talk about what that authorizing language says. The authorizing language there's two authorizations. One is for SAFER and one is for AFG. In AFG, it breaks down the requirements by which FEMA has to follow. One of those being the statutory set-asides. We call them the 25, 25, 25. And what that means is 25% of the funds for AFG are allocated to volunteer departments, 25 to career departments, 25 to combination departments. That's an important distinction, because sometimes we hear the argument, all the big departments get the money, so why should we bother? It's actually not factual. So the departments have the ability to compete with their own departments. The other part that is in that authorizing statute is that we are required to work with the fire service to set the priorities for this program. And in fact, the statute also says, if we don't agree with the recommendations provided with the fire service organizations, we have to publish a Federal Register notice explaining why FEMA did not accept those recommendations. And I know there's a long history behind that. So that's really where the fundamentals of the priorities are set. So we meet annually with CFSI, several other, we call them the 9 sisters, fire service organizations, all of which are listed in the Nofo. And we set the criteria for what's going to be the priorities for the program for that year. Once the priorities are set, we develop the Nofo, we publish the Nofo, we run the application period. Typically within 2 weeks after the application period, we do a peer review. It's now virtual. It used to be in person. It was really fun to bring 200 firefighters into DC area. At one point it was a hotel, and many times on campus at the NETC. And we sit them in a room and they evaluate your application based on the narrative components. Back it up one step. We do have a pre-score for AFG and SAFER, not for fire prevention. The pre-score is based on the questions that are in the Nofo, where we mark them as high, medium, or low in terms of what the priorities are of the program. So the application has questions. associated with that. Under AFG, the pre-score is used to determine which applications make it to panel. All of the SAFER applications are peer reviewed. So the pre-score is a component of your overall score, but not a component of whether or not you're paneled at all. From the peer review, we rack and stack the applications by what we call the buckets. So we have a career bucket and a combination bucket and a volunteer bucket, and then whoever's highest goes into a process, what we call the post-panel review. And that's where my staff and some of our regional partners review the application for compliance. We have also built an artificial intelligence based software system that is reviewing your application for potential waste, fraud, and abuse, and using some data to review that information. And so that process takes a couple weeks. And within that process, we're also making award recommendations. And then you had mentioned I have 28 staff. There's another 20 staff that work within Fema that we call the grants management side. They are more of a compliance arm on grants. And they process the awards as well. Many times, if you've ever received an award and are being monitored, it's typically from that compliance side. So those go through the awards. If a grant is over $1 million, we must do a congressional notification. So that takes a little bit of extra time. But then the awards start rolling out on a weekly basis. We've often been asked, why do we do rounds of awards? And that's really our ability to make announcements as we process and not hold all of the awards until all the application reviews are completed.
Okay. Can you appeal the decision, or is that pretty much final when you get rejected?
So if an award is made and we've made a reduction to the award, you have the ability to appeal the reduction if the funding has not already expired. We could take those into consideration. You can't appeal the decision of whether or not, you can't appeal the decision on your score.
Okay. And I know some fire departments have problems. They will apply for the grant. They will receive the grant, but then they find out that they can't provide the match. So what do you do then with that funding? Does it go back into the pool, or how does that all work?
So that's a matter of timing, right? We have the ability to, if the funding has not expired, which is 2 years after the initial appropriation. If it has not expired, we have the ability to go back and make more awards. If it has expired, meaning the money can no longer be used for making new awards, then that money goes back to Treasury.
Okay. And we are in FY 2021. But the
yes.
funding that you're working on right now
expires in September.
That's 2020 funding, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So we have been trying for several years through several challenges to get the funding, to get the application period in the fiscal year by which it was appropriated. We will likely make that goal for fiscal year 21, although the appropriations just happened a couple of weeks ago. We just need to get through this cycle in order to turn around and get to 21. So we'll get there, Bill. We'll get there someday.
Well, and I know that the onus kind of falls on CFSI and other organizations to get Congress to, to prod them along a little bit more with the appropriations process. But do you want to explain how the appropriations process and the lack of Congress being able to pass their appropriations legislation on time impacts your program?
Well, it has a lot of impacts, right? So the biggest impact we've had in recent years is a furlough. That put us far behind because when there is a furlough, when the government shuts down, none of the staff can work, right? So we then have to make up that time frame. But from the fiscal year starts October 1. So any time period by which we're under a continuing resolution and no appropriations happen, we cannot work on that program. So we would not be able to run a NOFO. We would not be able to run an application period, even in anticipation of appropriation. So that we basically are unable to get started on fiscal year 21 until that appropriation happens. The challenge that we've been had is that we've been behind on a year So it's also very difficult to run concurrent programs. If we have applicants who don't know what the decision is on their FY20, they're not going to be able to know whether or not they should apply for 21. So we need to wrap up one cycle before opening another.
Sounds like fun. As part of one of the COVID relief packages, there was funding in there, AFG funding it was COVID specific.
Yes.
And I know that you reopened the application process for volunteer combination departments. Where are you now with that?
Yep. Thanks for reminding me. We did have our first round of COVID supplemental funding. The first round of awards was last week. The second round will be tomorrow. We have, on our end, we have processed all of the award recommendations, so we're waiting for those to finalize the award process and be announced. I don't know if there will be a third round of funding available for fire departments under COVID. We'll have to wait and see if there's any additional legislative relief to that. Just a little background, the reason we opened up round 2 is that we did not have enough qualified applications from combination or volunteer departments to meet that statutory set aside, what we again, looking back at that 25, 25, 25. So we did open it up again for the volunteers and combinations. We have met the statutory set aside for combination. It is unclear that we're going to meet that for volunteers. So more to come on that when we know really the fallout of what those award cycles will make.
Okay. And, we've had an awful lot of discussions too on departments that just don't apply for the grants. The NFPA has conducted 4 needs assessment, and there's some good information in there, and then there's some not so good information in there. And some of the things that I kind of find disturbing is why there are so many departments that still don't have enough SCAs, radios, et cetera, et cetera. And so we've had this discussion in the criteria review meeting. One of the solutions that we did come up with was microgrants. So can you talk a little bit about microgrants and how some of these departments should be looking at those?
Yeah. So microgrants was established a few years ago. Part of that was to think of how to simplify an application for small items, quick need, and also incentivize departments who have been multi-year unsuccessful, right? So they keep trying. All they need is a couple coats, or they just need, a couple radios. So there is a funding cap limit to them. It's been expanded from 25K to 50K. So if you're looking for small needs, you've had a history of being unsuccessful, the requirements for some of the, grants management requirements are less restrictive on smaller amounts. So this is an opportunity that allows you to kind of quick in, quick out, get what you need. And again, especially if you've been multi-year unsuccessful, you get that boost in hopefully into making it into peer review for that.
Is that a separate application, or is that just within AFG? It's
within AFG. However, part of the discussion we're looking at with the flexibility of FEMA Go is, can we streamline this application? In the COVID environment, we did do a set aside for it, so that we had specific allocation of funding for it, and that's something we're going to look forward moving forward as well. Okay.
Research grants. You talked a little bit about that, the purpose of the research grants, how you go about making a selection for the research grants, and how you can go about finding information about the grants that have gone out to research facilities. Where can people learn about this, how that money's being spent, and on what?
Yeah, so the research grant started in and around 2005. They're a small subset of the fire prevention and safety program. They are specific to firefighter health and safety. The process is pretty unique. We do reference the National Fallen Firefighters Research Agenda. So they go out to every 4 years and meet with the fire service and the research institutions to come up with a list of priorities for research in the fire service. So we do link to that as a reference. Universities, organizations that conduct research apply under this program. is a two-part review process. The first part is what we call the Fire Service Relevance Review. So part of, just like we do with peer review for the other applications, part of this relevance review is if this was funded from a fire service perspective, from John Q. firefighter, would these findings from this research make a difference? And so those questions are reviewed in a peer review format. A subset of those applications then go to what we call a science review. And that's where we have other scientific questions on whether or not the science behind the study is valid. So it is a two-part review that we look at those awards. There's usually between 8 and 10 awards made per year. The abstracts for all of awards that have been funded under research and development is available on the website. It's in the resource handout, the virtual handout that I have. There's a link to it, so that you can go and read what all the beauty of the research is. What I liked about the research grants is that we're starting to see the outcome of some of this research go into the standards and making that impact to the standards. It's starting to go from where the researchers are now sharing that information. Some of the national fire service organizations are picking up and digesting that and creating programs and just helping with the dissemination of that research study. We also have examples of where fire departments were partners in that research and have changed their SOPs based on the outcomes of that research. One important example is the firefighter cancer cohort study being conducted at the University of Arizona and out of Miami, a couple other agencies. They were partnering with Tucson Fire Department. And Tucson Fire Department has changed some of their SOPs with respect to respiratory protection to engine and pump operators based on some of the findings of exposure to carcinogens at that level. So they were partners in a program. The study is showing that these folks are underprotected, and Tucson has made the change to their SOPs in order to make that provide that better protection. We also know that some of the studies out of this cohort study impacted the ability for some states to use that laboratory data to help with the firefighter presumptive care acts within their state, so that the cancer laws can be changed with the scientific information that's provided out of these studies. And another, important topic is, looking at, what preventive measures are actually effective. And so in this one cancer cohort study, we're talking about the ability to, prove that some of these prevention strategies actually work. Simple things like the baby wipes, like that came out pretty quick as this is a solution to, remove contaminants, but there wasn't any science behind whether or not it actually worked. Now there is. Now we know for sure that there's science behind saying these protective measures can actually work and reduce incidences of cancer.
Good.
Exposure.
So I was going to ask you, you have 3 big issues right now facing the fire service. There are a lot of issues, obviously, but COVID, cancer, suicide. How are these? Are you looking at those? When you're looking at this grant program, and how can we best address these major challenges in addition to the other challenges through AFG, through SAFER, through research? Yeah.
So there's a local solutions, and then there's national solutions, right? So in the local solutions, AFG does have a wellness and fitness component to it. And in that is behavioral health programs that are available. We've also added some cancerous programs, intervention programs. So I would strongly suggest folks who want to do something for the local level to look at those programs to see what they can establish locally for themselves. With respect to the FP&S side, we have national organizations that are developing programs, and we have the research and development. On the national level, as I mentioned, you see some of the trickle down from the research that they're implementing these programs based on research. but they're also implementing programs that support their membership on the national level as well. Prime example, the National Volunteer Fire Council has the program Share the Load, right, for suicide prevention.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have somebody that's in crisis and there's need, there's a program by which FEMA has funded and VFC developed the ability to call in to a number and get those resources and assistance that you need. International Association of Firefighters also established a program that's supporting, providing training to their on a local level for people to have that resource to go to within their fire department. So a lot of training programs are established. On the operational side, you know, what I really like is when we have programs like Underwriters Laboratory, who's doing all this research, and how that's on the operational tactics and how it's trickling down into changes that are being picked up by national organizations like International Society of Fire Service Instructors developed training programs around basement fires that was born out of research and development programs. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we talked a little bit about the COVID AFG supplemental. Mm-hmm. So it'll, you know, one of the things that we've also funded is a very recent study is really what is the impact on pandemics on not just the behavioral health of the fire department, but what strategies, what lessons learned from this year for any future pandemic. What could the fire service do better or different? What can the fire service do to protect its own and understand the impact that this pandemic has had? So that's a study that we're going to be watching very closely. And again, details about some of these studies and programs is available on the website. So I think there's a lot of things that we fund that sometimes isn't necessarily clear that that was AFG funding. But I do like when I see the national programs roll out, or I do hear a reference to a change that was made to a standard. I was like, yeah, we funded that. That's pretty cool. So we get our happy moments there.
Oh, good deal. Quick, you mentioned Nofos again. Somebody asked a question about posting the Nofos. Do you have dates when you're going to be posting each of the Nofos?
Yeah, so the AFG Nofos obviously posted since the program's open. FP&S is posted. I was trying to pin down a date for the safer one before we joined the call. It does not look like it's going to post today, but either tomorrow or early next week, it will be live. Again, and that one doesn't open until February, so still within 2 weeks of the opening. We like to give as much time as possible. Again, we get pressured under get it out, so as soon as it gets approved, and it's a very lengthy approval process. Yeah. So once it's approved, we try to turn it out as close as possible. But looking at what that timeline dictates, I will guarantee you that it will never post the same day as the application period opens. But there have been instances when it's posted fairly close to the opening date. In this case, this year, we were able to give about a 2-week notice, especially for fire prevention and safer.
I had a couple of questions about micro, just a couple of questions about the grants in general. Can you apply for both a micro grant and an AFG grant? I would assume that answer would be what, yes?
Not under the same activity, right? So okay, if you're going to apply under ops and safety, you're going to restrict your application to 50K. You do have the ability to apply for a vehicle, but you would not apply for another ops and safety.
So how does that work? I mean, you could put together a whole shopping list of items you want to apply for. Are there certain restrictions in terms of what you can apply for? Ops, training, and how does that work?
It doesn't. So it is restricted by money, right? Okay. So the list item is the same. There used to be some restrictions on whether modifications facilities or wellness and fitness were eligible. We've removed, based on recommendations from our partners, we have removed those restrictions. So again, if we look at streamlining the application, the biggest benefit will be, not particularly for FY20, but potentially for 21, is a smaller application. We have to look at what information we absolutely need in order to get those pushed through quickly. But the benefit really is especially that plus up if you've been multi-year unsuccessful, and the fact that there are fewer restrictions in terms of grants management.
Okay. Yeah, and I am getting questions. Where can we find info on a Nofo? I mean, basically, if you go on the internet, do a Google search for Assistance to Firefighters Grant Program or Staffing for Adequate Fire, you're gonna land on the FEMA website, and you will be able to navigate your way through and find a Nofo relatively easy. If I could find it, anyone really.
Yeah.
There's no question about that. I know sometimes you get some letters of support either from members of Congress, local political leaders. Is that a good use of time to go out and get those letters? Do you get them, or do you just kind of, you know?
We do respond to them.
Okay.
The peer reviewers do not see them.
Okay.
But I think the important part of that interaction is the fact that you're communicating what needs are on a local level to your representative, right? So the best part of that conversation is saying, you know, we're looking for this help and this is why. And then the representatives who are looking at authorizations and appropriations and what's needed for their constituents has that visibility into what's needed. So I think that's an important consideration to those conversations, probably far more important than the actual letter coming to FEMA.
Yeah, I mean, I always say, you know, Tip O'Neill, former Speaker of the House, once said all politics is local. You know, when we do our bit, we send messages up to Capitol Hill, drawing attention to the needs assessment. But it's just as effective if you can go to your member of Congress as a representative of the Vienna Volunteer Fire Department, my department, and spell out how this program is benefiting the Vienna Volunteer Fire Department. And that message does really resonate with members of Congress. There's no question about that. So that was a good point. What makes a good application? I mean, I know there's certain things that you see in each of the applications that get rejected, a common denominator perhaps, that prevents the applications from moving forward.
Yeah, so sticking with priorities, right? So we put the appendix in place with the red H for a reason. You know, the priorities are important. So some of the challenges that I think folks find is that their local needs don't necessarily meet the priority. And what I would suggest in that case is perhaps think, I really need A, but it's not a priority under this program. So perhaps you use your resources to get A and find the funding for AFG for something perhaps that that does meet the priority. So yes, the funding priorities are critically important, especially in a very competitive application pool. The second piece to that is preparing a competitive narrative. And the reason that's important is because you need to tell your story. And I can't tell you how many times I'm on the phone with a fire department who was unsuccessful, and they're telling me all these details about, you know, the challenges at a local level. Like, here's my story, and they're telling it to you on the phone. At the same time, I'm looking at their narrative and I'm like, you didn't say that. You didn't say that either. Like, it's just, I understand that many folks within the fire service are very good at having that round table, kitchen table conversation, and perhaps not taking the leap to being able to articulate that in the competitive program. So I would just suggest to you that perhaps think about it when you're having table conversations about what your challenges are. Take some notes and turn that into your narrative. Because I do think that when folks tell their own story at a local level, what their challenges are, how are they unable to fund it, age of the equipment, examples of things that have gone wrong based on their equipment and needs. Those are all very compelling stories. I do know that the majority of the reasons that narratives are unsuccessful is in the financial need. And when I look at financial need narratives, many of them talk about, you know, we're poor, the economic downturn in our area, the COVID has, you know, used up all our resources. But if you think about it from a panelist perspective, they're going to read that, you know, several hundred times. How does that make you unique? What is your unique incidence? What have you done locally to try and do fundraising in order to meet this need? So think about it from a panelist perspective, and when they're looking for your level of detail on your fire department's financial need in order to take that into consideration. So those are, I mean, it's important piece. Definitely stick with the priorities, and definitely, tell your story, tell your department story.
Regional grants scored differently, or they scored, are they part of the whole?
They're evaluated against their own group.
Okay.
So looking at that, we had talked about the career combination of volunteer, right?
Mm-hmm.
So some of the elements within those, especially under AFG, looks at the age of equipment, looks at your call volume. And by the way, call volume is in the statute. So we do ask for a reason, right? And in a competitive program, what we don't want to do is disadvantage any fire department type. So not only is this pre-score associated with your combination volunteer and career designation, it also includes a sub-level of ranking between urban, rural, and suburban. So your rural volunteer department is being evaluated in this pre-score against other like departments on your age, on your call volume, so that there isn't a disadvantage there, so that those national level, folks who run a lot of calls aren't competing with these smaller departments. So that's an important piece in that consideration.
Okay. I've had a lot of people asking so far, have you made a copy of this presentation? Hopefully we have. I'm not the techie guy, so I'm trusting Michaela has. But doesn't you guys, your office, don't you conduct regional events or virtual events such as this to provide answers and information?
We do applicant webinars. Certainly that is very in the weeds on what the application cycle is about. We used to do a lot of these outreach initiatives at national programs, at national events. It's been a little limited at the moment. So hopefully when those start to open back up, we will be back on the road to talk at high level on what the program's all about. But again, on that virtual handout that we'll be able to provide to folks, it does have linked to a lot of different resources. And one of the ones I would strongly encourage folks to look at is, take a look at the website for the notice of funding opportunities. Take a look at the website for the research projects that would have been funded. Obviously the Nofos are there as well. But there's also other resources that I've linked to in that handout. And that is, we have regional partners. So each FEMA region, there's 10 of them. We have a regional fire program specialist in each region. So I've provided a link to that. They're kind of the boots on the ground at the regional level to help with not only preparation of applications, but the management of the grant. And they also do their local training events as well. So some regions still do in person, some are doing all virtual. And so I would strongly encourage folks to use all those resources available. One also listed, I think is critically important, is, federal grants. We're all trying to be good stewards of the federal tax dollars. It's your tax dollars as well as it's mine. So we do have requirements by which you have to follow. There are federal rules against that come with managing grant dollars. So there is a grants management technical assistance group within FEMA. They do have a web page of their own that provides training, so you can familiarize yourself with what you're getting into if you're going to accept federal dollars and how to manage them. And I would strongly suggest taking one of those classes. They used to do them in person. They're working on some virtual technical assistance and training as well, just like everybody else has to adapt. But I do see that somewhere in the future that those classes will become available, and they were being conducted on the road and also at the National Fire Academy.
Okay. As we've been saying for a long time, the beauty of this whole program is it was developed, managed, implemented by members of the fire service. Our organization, all the other organizations, individual firefighters have worked with AFG, FEMA, again, every step of the way to make sure that this program is implemented and properly funded. And so there is a responsibility for fire departments, just as there is your office, to make sure that the funds are properly administered, but more importantly, properly spent, and to make sure that you have those safeguards in place to make sure that there is no type of misuse of those funds, because that does come back to haunt you. That comes back to haunt us when we go up to Capitol Hill. There have been reports, not necessarily written about these grant programs, but other grant programs, talking about how money is being squandered away, no accountability. And so, you know, I think there's this misnomer at times that, you know, nobody's really watching how Congress is spending this money. Well, to a certain extent, you know, that could be true. But there is accountability built into a lot of these programs, and we can't take that for granted, and we can't ignore that. And so that's why, again, you know, to everyone listening to it and to anyone who's ever received a grant, you know, follow the guidelines. And that just goes beyond, except once you get the money. Once you get that money, there are a lot of things that you need to do, you know, to make sure that the funds are being spent properly. And I know that makes your job a lot easier, and you can free up more of your staff to go about doing other types of work that is so essential to keep this program operational. So I thank you for the tremendous work you've been doing throughout the year. We've got a lot of questions that are coming in. A lot of these questions can really be answered in the Nofo. And so I would direct a lot of you who have asked some of these questions, you know, how much, what's the maximum, what's the minimum for a micro grant, what are the deadlines? Again, you've got that contact information up there on the screen. You've got information I have posted for CFSI. If you have any questions about what's going on up on Capitol Hill with respect to the funding of these programs, you know, yesterday was a beautiful day in our nation. We swore in a new president, a new vice president. Our democracy is vibrant, it's healthy, it's moving along. Had a bump in the road a couple of weeks ago, but we're back on track, I believe. And you know, we do have our work cut ahead of us. We've got over 60 members of new congressmen and women in both the House and the Senate. A lot of these folks don't know about AFG Safer. And so they really need to be educated about why these programs are so essential. You know, one of the biggest challenges we face, and I've been doing this for 25 years, is you go into members of Congress's office, and quite often the first question asked is, why the federal government? Why is the federal government providing funding for local fire departments? You know, funding that has been provided for over 200 years by local governments and, you know, to a certain extent, state governments. But there is a need. And I always like to point out that this program came about, it was actually first authorized before 9/11. Right. So, you know, 9/11, it was a tragic event in our nation's history, but it really woke up a lot of people, and it really helped a lot of folks up on the Hill understand why the federal government has a role and has a responsibility. You know, 9/11 was 20 years ago. And so some of the memories of that tragic day are kind of slowly slipping away when it comes to what programs should we be funding up on Capitol Hill. And that's why, again, I cannot stress the importance of again, introducing yourselves to your members of Congress and taking them out on the ride-along programs, taking them to your training academies, putting them in a turnout gear, and let them understand, you know, what this is all about. 5,000 for turnout gear, you know, 3,000 or 4,000 for the radios, the training. And as you talked about, cancer, COVID, suicide, these are issues that we're all grappling with. And it's the role of every level of government, local, state, and federal, to help us out in this effort. So again, I just want to thank you for everything that you and your office are doing. You say you have 28 staff, but when you look at it, $700 million grant program being administered by 28 people within a federal agency, it is quite an achievement what you're doing. And most of you know, Cathie is the most accessible person you can find conducting grant programs, and you're doing a great job. And like I said, we're with you all the way. And so we can't thank you enough, Cathie, for the work you're doing. So I don't know if you have any closing thoughts you would like to make, but again, thank you very much. So I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I just appreciate the opportunity to be here. I can't believe how quickly an hour went by. I think we could sit around and chat about grants all day. There's so much good that I think we're doing with these programs. Is it perfect? No. Do I wholeheartedly agree with you that the uniqueness of the fire grants is that we do work so closely with the fire service to ensure that we're trying to meet all the diverse type of needs. You know, there's no two departments that are the same. So we try to do our best to kind of accommodate as much as we can. But it is unique and it is special. I started with a program in 2002, answering phones the week before the application period opened, and now here I am with the keys to the, keys to the closet. So I think it's a great program, and appreciate all the support that your organization has given to us and all the fire service partners. But I sincerely appreciate the fire service. Spent majority of my career working with the fire service, so it's a blessing to be able to participate in something that I know that makes a difference. So
thank you very much. Keep it up. Keep up the great work. Again, if anyone has any follow-up questions, you have my email address, CFSI's email address, update@cfsi.org. Please send them to us, and we'll send them along to Cathie so you can get a good response rather quickly. But again, a lot of the information I think you'll find is available in the Nofos. So again, thanks again, Cathie, and thanks to all of you for what you're doing, and stay safe, and look forward to chatting with you again. Thanks, and have a great day.
Thanks.